This is the December 3rd, 2020 Capital Funding Protection Committee meeting. We move on to the roll call, please.
Kevin Reese.
Here.
Oscar Delgado is absent. Charlene Bybee.
Here.
Paul Anderson.
Here.
Bob Lucy. Absent. Jean Herman.
Here.
Justin Ivory.
Here.
Andrew Diss is absent. Elise Bonkowski is absent. Sophia Cardinal.
Here.
And Dave Solero.
Here.
Thank you all. We do have a quorum.
All right, thank you very much. Moving on to item 1.03 is public comment. Due to the current state of emergency declared by the governor, members of the public wishing to make public comment about an item on the agenda must submit their comments via email to capitalfundingcommittee@washoeschools.net. Any public comments received will be forwarded to the Capital Funding Protection Committee for its consideration, consent with the emergency provisions noticed above. So, Ms. Scott, are there any public comments that you're aware of?
There is not.
All right, thank you very much. We'll go ahead and move on to item 1.04, action to adopt the agenda.
Move to approve. Reese.
Second. Herman.
I've got a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Not seeing any. We'll go ahead and move on to item 2.01, discussion and possible action to approve the minutes for the August 6th, 2020 Capital Funding Protection Committee meeting.
I'll go ahead. I'll move to approve the minutes from the August 6, 2020 Capital Funding Protection Committee meeting as presented.
I'll second it.
Second.
Justin Ivory.
Got a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Carries unanimously. So we will go ahead and move on to item 2.02, which is a presentation, discussion, and possible action on the construction auditing agreed upon procedures, services associated with Washoe County School District Capital Improvement Program. And I believe Mr. Searcy is going to kick this one off for us.
Yes, hi, thank you. Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Adam Searcy. I'm the Chief Facilities Management Officer for the school district. If it feels like we've been discussing this for quite some time, you are not just living through the Groundhog Day that is 2020. I went back and looked and confirmed, counting this evening, this will be at least the 9th time that this topic has been on the Capital Funding Protection Committee agenda in some form or fashion dating back to mid-2018. I'll spare you the long saga, but we've transitioned internal auditors, issued nationwide RFQ, secured an external auditing firm, and conducted a rigorous audit of the capital projects department during a pandemic. That's the introduction. The full report is in your meeting documents attached, but I'd like to turn the mic and the presentation over first to the school district's chief auditor, Mr. Kirk Starkey. Go ahead, Kirk.
Good afternoon, Chairman, members of the committee. Kirk Starkey for the record. In case there's a couple new members to the committee, I know this has been going on for a while, but I'll provide a little context or background for this item. Basically, in November 2016, Washoe County voters approved a ballot question that increased the sales and use tax in the county by 0.54%. Proceeds from the tax increase are meant to fund district capital projects for the acquisition, construction, repair, and renovation of school facilities. The tax collections began in April 2017, and the revenues have provided funding for several new schools, classroom additions, and certain other repairs such as roofs. As you're aware, the Capital Projects Department is tasked with the planning, delivery, and oversight of the capital projects. This includes those funded by WC1 revenues. The department is also responsible for establishing proper internal controls to manage the projects. Our office was asked, like Adam was saying, to secure a third-party firm to audit the capital improvement program. In doing so, I worked with a member of the audit committee and a former member of this committee to craft the agreed upon audit procedures for the engagement. The scope of the engagement was all WC1 revenues, bond proceeds, and the associated expenditures through August 31, 2019. and the objective of the engagement was to determine whether expenditures made from public monies associated with the program align with certain laws and regulations, and to determine if the district has implemented internal controls which adequately safeguard assets and ensure project completion according to construction agreements. We solicited service providers to offer the cost proposals for performing the audit. Around February 2020, Protiviti was selected to complete the project. Protiviti is a global consulting and internal audit firm composed of experts in audit services, engineering, and construction management. I believe the report being presented today positively reflects the division's efforts, the district's efforts in managing the WC1 funded capital projects. But before going forward, I wanted to thank the management and staff of the entire capital projects department, the purchasing department, and the business office, along with the Protiviti team itself, for all the cooperative efforts in helping getting this project completed. And to provide more insight and basically discuss the methodology and report findings, I'd like to introduce Mr. John Crotelli. John is the Managing Director of Capital Projects and Contracts for Protiviti. John?
Yeah, thank you, Kirk, and good afternoon, everyone. For today's presentation, I will plan to address our scope and objectives approach and the findings associated with the capital improvement program audit, and then, of course, be happy to address any questions or comments that the group may have. Similar to what Kirk mentioned, the objectives of this audit were to ascertain whether expenditures made from public monies associated with the capital improvement program align with certain regulations, and to determine if WCSD has implemented financial and administrative procedures and internal controls to safeguard assets and ensure project completion according to construction agreements. As Mr. Starkey previously indicated, our audit scope included all WC1 revenues, bond proceeds, and capital improvement program expenditures related to projects completed or in progress during the period from January 1st, 2017 through August 31st, 2019. We did conduct our work in accordance with the international standards for the professional practice of internal auditing, otherwise known as the IIA standards, which require that we plan and perform the audit to obtain sufficient and appropriate evidence to provide a reasonable basis for our findings and conclusions based on our audit objectives. Furthermore, an understanding of the internal control structure of WCSD was not deemed to be significant in meeting our audit objectives. Therefore, the scope of our work did not constitute a review and evaluation of the overall internal control structure at WCSD or controls within in-scope systems from which data was obtained for this audit. Ultimately, WCSD management is responsible for establishing and maintaining a system of internal controls to ensure that these assets are secured, financial activity is accurate and reliable, and that employees follow laws, ordinances, policies, and procedures. To achieve our stated audit objectives, we performed 13 individual procedures that were defined by WCSD internal audit and agreed upon before the commencement of our audit work. The agreed upon procedures were designed to address areas such as the identification of all projects and reconciliation of the projects with financial records and expenditures, summarization and trending of revenues and expenditures, including analysis of funds flow, evaluation of internal controls associated with the collection and disbursement of funds, purchasing processes, project management, and change order procedures, evaluation of contractor performance against project timelines and budgets, and investigation of any unusual expenditures that may be noted during our audit work. To conduct the agreed upon procedures, we utilized a multi-phased approach that included document collection, data analysis, detailed control and transaction testing, and then ultimately audit reporting. As a result of our audit work, we noted the following: internal controls associated with the funds collection and disbursement, purchasing, project management, and change management are appropriately designed and appear to be operating effectively for the period in scope. And secondly, that based on the projects and transactions sampled and the documentation provided by WCSD, capital project expenditures appear to be in accordance with the requirements of WC1, charged to the proper budget categories, and recorded within the correct fiscal period. We did note 2 opportunities for improvement, which are further detailed in our report, of course, but I'll cover those now as well. Our first improvement opportunity was related to project performance reporting and status monitoring. We noted during our audit that information on progress of ongoing construction projects is not clearly communicated to the public on a regular basis, aside from the annual capital improvement plan evaluation report. Relevant performance-based project information is shared publicly, but not consolidated in a single location or using dashboards. Project information is currently shared on the WCSD web pages and the Board of Trustees meeting minutes and presentation materials and there is not a single consolidated location to review the status of all ongoing projects to compare actual progress against proposed budgets and timelines. It's our recommendation that the WCSD Capital Projects Department consider standardizing the project status communications based on project type. We also recommended that the Capital Projects Department prepare and publish a quarterly dashboard or report for public consumption that addresses items such as all current projects under construction, original budget of the project along with estimated completion dates, total dollar value of change orders to date, the revised budget, and any estimated revisions to completion dates, expenditures to date, and percentage of work complete. We reviewed this recommendation with management, and management has accepted our recommendation and indicated that they will standardize its project status communication based on project type. They also indicated that they have initiated significant revisions to the building website where relevant project information on all major projects can be found, and have also recently issued a quarterly report on active major projects, all of which can be found on the website. In response to this key finding, WCSD has indicated that they will work to streamline and create consistency with the information suggested for all active major capital projects and anticipate the implementation of this item by summer of 2021. Our second and final improvement opportunity that we noted, and again, it's important to note that these are not necessarily audit findings as much as they are improvement opportunities resulting from our procedures performed. The second item here is related to standardized metrics for project review and approval. We did note that budget proposals submitted to the Capital Funding Protection Committee, this group, and the Board of Trustees for new schools do not utilize a standard format for presenting data related to proposed project budgets for consideration prior to approval by each group. Presenting this data in an inconsistent format from project to project may cause confusion or diminish the value of the presentation of key metrics to be considered prior to approval. Capital Funding Protection Committee and Board of Trustees presentation materials and meeting minutes did not utilize a standard template to consistently communicate project budget considerations and comparisons to industry standard metrics. It is our recommendation that the Capital Projects Department consider standardizing the formatting and information included in major project proposals to the Capital Funding Protection Committee and the Board of Trustees, and that the proposal should include at a minimum information such as square footage compared to other schools with similar enrollment size, cost per square foot compared to schools of similar size and geography built within the past 2 to 3 years, and comparisons of the original high-level project budget approved by the Board of Trustees versus any third-party estimates and construction manager or risk estimates that include actual dollars amounts and any explanations for the variances against those benchmarks. Management has accepted our recommendation and indicated that they will work to implementing standardized presentation of capital project costs and budgets relative to the 3 noted metrics as a point of consistency, and that they have been and will continue to present multifaceted supporting information for every budgetary recommendation, noting that projects are often unique in scope and many other variables warrant unique supporting information in addition to the consistent metrics recommended. The group anticipates full implementation of this item also by the summer of 2021. So that concludes the brief overview of the report. Obviously, the detailed report has a lot more information around our procedures performed, the transactions, the projects, and scope, but I'm certainly happy to answer any questions or address any comments from the group.
Move to accept.
Actually, if I could ask a couple of questions, please.
Absolutely. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, actually, just want to thank the school district staff, as well as John, you and your team doing this work. This is one that obviously it's plagued us for a while here. Citizens, as well as some of us on the board, have been concerned about the funds and making sure that we have a good view and an eye, independent, looking at these transactions. I did have a question in regard to the projects. On the sampling for the projects and the transactions, how did you guys determine which ones to sample?
Right, so we wanted to find, we did sampling based on the size of the project type, and then also the period in which the project was performed. We were provided an entire population of the projects and judgmentally selected our samples based on that. So that was independently done by us, again, based on those attributes that I mentioned.
Perfect, thank you.
I have a quick question, if I may. Hi, this is Sophie Carnell for the record. I just wanted to say, as a former auditor, I really enjoyed reading this report. It looked like a ton of work went into this on both the auditor's side and school district side, so good job. Very thorough, it seems. And I think it's great that the conclusion was that school district is doing a pretty darn good job. So that was really great to see. The one question I had, maybe for Adam, I noticed in there that one of their procedures looked at change orders. There were 6 projects and there were 83 change orders for those combined 6 projects, totaling 7.5 million. I know things come up during projects that create the need for change orders, but Adam, perhaps you could talk about what you and your team do to try to reduce the number of change orders and create efficiencies.
Sure, I'll take a stab at that. For the record, this is Adam Searcy again with the school district. I will comment that the majority of these projects that were selected for analysis were rather large. So the amount of change orders and scale of those costs are, commensurate with the size of the projects. Majority of the work that goes into minimizing the cost and scale of the change orders takes place before construction begins. Whether it's through a construction manager at risk, whether it's through sort of after action analysis of projects that, prototype projects that we've constructed previously, going through and value engineering them, scrubbing the plans, so to speak, with the redlined actual construction information, and ensuring that those changes are incorporated into the bid documents for the next project. Those are really the primary efforts that we put forward. And then beyond that, I would comment that the scale of those change orders, I guess, is reflective of the rigorous process that we have. That each and every one of those contract change orders needs to be managed and documented in a discrete way. Doing so within the appropriate contract contingencies is our overall objective. But when you really dig into the books, as Protivity did, you'll see all the appropriate backup documentation and all of the detail, whether it's a $2,500 ad for a little widget on this thing, or whether it is a 6-figure bogey by the entire team. These are the things that need to get vetted by the appropriate engineers of record, architects, and agreed upon financially before they can go forward. So, these are big projects, and we do everything we can to minimize any change orders. But each and every time they come up, they need to be documented accordingly.
Which I did see that they were. So thank you, Adam.
All right, we've got a motion on the floor. I do have to double check if there's any public comment. I didn't see any in my inbox. Hopeful that I can take silence from Ms. Scott that we don't have any public comment. So I'll entertain a second.
There is no public comment at this time.
All right, thanks, Kendall.
Thank you, Dave.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a second to the motion.
All right, I've got a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Looks like the motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That'll take us on to item 2.03, which is a presentation, discussion, and possible action to recommend and forward to the Washoe County School District Board of Trustees the 2020 Capital Improvement Program Annual Evaluation Report. So again, I will turn this over to Mr. Searcy. Adam, you're muted.
Thanks for that. All right, let's try this again. Everybody see the screen and the presentation? All right. This is a report required by our governing policy associated with this committee. It does touch on a couple of the items that we just heard from our auditors as opportunities for improvement, and covers a period of time that was challenging for everybody in this community. But we've had some successes, and I want to turn the floor over to our Director of Design, Teresa Golden, to walk you all through this presentation. Teresa?
All right, thank you. Hi everybody. Thanks very much for letting me present this annual evaluation report to you today for our capital improvement program. Slide. Can you advance it, Adam?
Sorry about that. Let me try this again.
Thanks.
Is that sharing well?
Okay, I think we need to, oh, that's good. Yeah. Perfect, thank you. So I just wanted to start out by letting everyone know where they can find all the information in regards to our capital improvement program. And that is on our building website page. There is a ton of information here. At the bottom of our building website page, there's a data gallery link, and it looks like this picture you see on your right. There's information in here about our capital renewable program, our new buildings, our energy efficiency program, and projects, among many other things. So it's recently been upgraded. It's really easy to navigate. You can find information almost for any site, any school, in regards to past projects and upcoming renewal projects as well. And then in addition to that, there is a link on our page as well on quarterly reports. The quarterly reports are more for a progress report on maybe bigger, higher level projects, not necessarily the new schools, but some of our larger maintenance and renewal projects that are going on as well. So if you do click on the capital renewal program, you will see something that looks like on the next slide. So this is a snapshot of one of the schools that I just happened to select. Again, you can select any school, any site, and it will give you this list of upcoming maintenance projects that are planned for this particular site. That information is gathered from our assessment department. They go out to every school annually. They evaluate all of our systems, all of our equipment, our finishes, etc. They document the deficiencies. They put that information into our facility condition index system, and then that interpolates the information and gives us a priority list that you see here of projects that we should be working on. As you can imagine, it's a hugely important tool for us to use. It's our Bible. We live by it because to prioritize these projects in any other way would be very difficult at the number of sites that we have and the work that needs to be done. So as you can see, it does list the items, associates a cost with them. And so really any person from the public and or any employee can go on the website and get this information. So a good tool, again, also for principals, site supervisors, etc., to see what's upcoming at their site. Next slide, please. This is information also on that same exact page. So this is a project that happened in the past at that site. This is a demo and abatement project. You can see it was advertised for bidding in January. It lists all the construction companies that bid on the project, the amounts they bid, and who was awarded the project. So again, you can see a very valuable tool that can be used by anyone internally or externally. So I think this is where we have a really cool video to show that our communications department put together of all of our projects that we completed over the past year.
All right. Everybody seeing this now again?
Yep.
WCSD's Capital Projects team has been hard at work this year, investing into our buildings so that students for generations to come will have schools that are safe, warm, and dry. Thanks to the 2016 ballot initiative that approved the use of sales tax funding for new schools and repairs, our district has been able to open up 5 beautiful new schools and invest millions in critical repairs. And we have several more amazing projects in the works. This school year, we opened up Marcyhurst Middle School in South Reno and John C. Bohatch Elementary School in Spanish Springs. The 3 new schools we opened last year, Sky Ranch Middle School, Desert Skies Middle School, and Nick Polikitis Elementary, had a successful first year. And we've invested in our older schools to make sure that all of our students have access to spaces that will keep them safe, warm, and dry. This summer alone, we were able to conduct repairs and upgrades at 76 of our buildings. These repairs to roofing, floors, fields, and HVAC systems have made our older schools more energy efficient and comfortable for all of our students. And we're not stopping there. 3 of our older schools are getting completely brand new buildings. Of course, there's our new Proctor Hug High School, which is being built near Wild Creek Golf Course. All current Proctor Hug students and staff will move to the new building when it opens in 2022. The nearly 300,000 square foot building will feature learning rooms, labs, and performance spaces. And once the new high school opens, the old Proctor Hug campus will be refashioned into a state-of-the-art career and technical school, the Debbie Smith CTE Academy High School, which will open in 2023. O'Brien STEM Academy is also getting a brand new building. The new 3-story building will be built on the grounds of the current school and will be breaking ground this winter for a 2022 opening. And contractors have been working since this summer on Swope Middle School, which is getting a new gym and classroom building and complete upgrades to the older sections, and will also open in 2022. And of course, there's our newest elementary school, Michael Inskeep Elementary School in North Cold Springs, which will open next year and will reduce overcrowding in some of our most crowded facilities. We're so excited to be able to continue working on these projects to bring new and upgraded schools to our WCSD family. Keep in touch with us and follow all of these projects at washoeschools.net/building.
All right, we'll switch this back.
Okay, I don't have to say anything else because the video was great. Pretty much explained it all. No, in all seriousness, so talking about our capital renewable program, this really, it's kind of the meat and potatoes of what we do in capital projects, right? This is what keeps our schools up and running like every day. So kind of proud to just kind of review what we've finished here and accomplished over the past couple of years. So starting back in 2018, our allocation was 21 million and all of those projects have been totally complete. Our 2019 allocation was about 30 million and those projects are all substantially complete, other than about a handful that we're still just formally finishing up. So that was approximately 220 projects finished that year. 100 of those projects roughly are part of our phase 1 of our energy efficiency retrofit project that Jason Geddes has sort of managed and coordinated that project with construction. So it's a very significant project of huge importance, and phase 1 of that project was finished that year. We also finished up our single point entry projects. We were tasked with finishing or completing 25 elementary schools, doing the single points over about a 2-year period, and those were finished in August of 2019. Our calendar year 2020, so you see 2 renewal allocations here for 2020. That's because our allocation schedule was sort of shifted from a calendar year to a fiscal year, so that is why you see 2 allocations there for 2020. So, total was about 77 million. We have a significant number of those projects completed. Calendar year, we have 74% of those projects complete. Part of that was another batch of those energy retrofit projects. The single points, just ignore that. That's not correct. Those were already done the year before. But 51% of the projects in fiscal year 2020 are complete, and And I have to say that is during COVID. So this has been a really challenging time, and I think quite commendable that we were able to finish these projects in a timely manner and as scheduled. We did have, a period in the spring where things were just at a standstill until everybody figured out what was going on. We did have some vendors and equipment that were delayed for a bit, but everybody figured it out and we were able to move on and get things completed. Phase 3 of the energy projects were completed this year in the fall. And, our other major projects that we're always completing, the biggest ones are HVAC, roofing, paving. Those are our significant largest projects that we're always trying to complete. But also the priorities are safety and fire life safety projects. 2021, our allocation is $25 million this year. And we're about 10% complete with those projects. So just as an FYI, you should have in your packet, every single one of these projects in this renewable program are attached to your packet. So if you have any specific information about those particular projects, you can look at that spreadsheet, or please just let me know. Just a little bit about change orders on these renewable projects that we do. Any contracts over $100,000 are formally bid, and we attach to them a force account of 15% of the estimated construction cost. So as you can see, over the past few years, our change order rates have been anywhere from 3 to 4%. That percentage really is quite commendable for renewable projects that are happening in existing buildings. In fact, I would say that probably under an average percentage of about 5%. So, and that money that we, like I said, the 15% is our force account. We're only spending 3% in reality on a whole year of projects. That money is moves forward to the next allocation so we can reuse it. So this brings me to our major project highlights for this year, many of which were just gone over in that video that we saw. Of course, the 2 new schools are the biggest highlights, opening of HERS and Bow Hatch Elementary School. We were able to start construction on Swope. Phase 1 of that project is complete. Phase 2 of that project is underway currently, which is our new gym mainly. And phase 3 will go out to bid in January. We started our new Wild Creek. That is quite the sight to see in real life. If you drive by Sullivan Lane, it's a big project. So that's very exciting. We began construction there. Phase 4 of that project, which I believe is the offsite improvements, is out to bid right now, I believe. And again, that project is due to be complete fall of 22. We also just broke ground on O'Brien literally this week for phase 1. Our grading and building pad work for that phase 1 just started, and we're going out to bid for the building phase of that project in January as well. And spring 2020, not spring 2021, we started design on Debbie Smith CTE, and construction is set to begin in 2022. Next slide, please. So this brings us to our numbers for these major projects. This spreadsheet here shows our original approved allocations for the projects, what we have committed or contracted, and the remaining balances, and of course a status of those projects as well. Back at 2018, as you can see on the bottom, we had committed $213 million toward all of these projects. As of today in 2020, we are up to $620 million in total contracted committed money toward these projects. So, I mean, there's been a lot of work going on, a lot of progress, exciting growth. And so kudos to our team, I think is in order. I'm really proud of what we've accomplished. As you can see, 80% of these projects are complete. There's only a few, really a handful that we're still working on that have been approved at this point, and due to be complete here in the next couple of years. So this leads me to my conclusion. I did want to just touch base a little bit on hiring consultants and how we go about doing that. there's, a pretty public process for hiring contractors, as you all are aware of. The people often ask how we hire our consultants. So a few years back, we sent out requests for qualifications for architecture and engineering consultants. We created a committee to review those qualifications, and that is how we decided on the qualified consultants that we would have a pool for, and we can draw on that pool of consultants when we have projects that are coming up in either our renewable plan or our new schools or expansions or whatever it may be. Those consultants are hired based on their specialty or their schedule or staffing at the time for whatever particular project we're looking to hire a consultant for. So it's really important for us to spread the wealth, if you will, and to try to give everybody an equal opportunity around our neighborhood, if you will. So we are also in the process of, right now, we have an RFQ out for commissioning consulting services. So we are doing the same thing there. We are providing a pool of consultants for commissioning. And then in a week here or so, we are also sending out an RFQ to look for roofing consultant for our management program and inspection. So, and then I did just really want to touch base quickly on our audit. Obviously, Kirk and John went over that in great detail, and I appreciate their work in that because it helps us, do better. So we're going to work on that, streamlining and standardizing our reporting and the best we can. But, want to just express for me and my team, I truly believe that, being responsible for our taxpayer money and really spending that money wisely is our number one goal. And I think that that audit really kind of reflects that. So that is the conclusion of my presentation. Does anyone have any questions?
Any questions for Ms. Golden? Member Ivory, go ahead.
Yeah, just you had mentioned the selection process for the architect and engineer, and you said you guys put a committee together. Who does that committee consist of?
So typically we select a person from each of our departments within capital projects. So we try to select someone from planning, someone from construction, someone from maintenance. And then also we select someone from the outside. So a consultant, or probably not a consultant in this case, but someone from the construction industry. So a contractor, general contractor often will bring in, or another consultant from, for example, Joe Gabika, we might bring him in now, right? Because he's very familiar with the process and that type of thing. But we always try to bring someone in from the construction industry as well to get their input.
And then what about the process for like your special inspectors, your construction managers, your what do you call them?
The construction manager companies.
Yeah, or the commissioning, the building commissioning. How are those selected? Is it the exact? I mean, pretty much the exact same process all the way through.
The commissioning, like I said, we are actually we have an RFQ out right now as we speak for a commissioning pool of consultants. So we are going through the same process to get a pool. Up to this point, commissioning agents just have been selected between construction and planning and just talking to the companies to see who's available, what their qualifications are, what their workloads are. There's not a ton of them around here. So we are kind of limited, but we have tried to use various companies for commissioning. The construction managers, I did fail to mention, I believe we have a pool for that as well. Tony McMillan, who is our director of construction, he actually kind of manages that pool. So he also has a pool that he did for construction management that he draws consultants from for that service as well.
And once again, that's done from in-house staff along with outside professionals that are used to select that.
I'm I didn't manage that pool or that hiring process. Tony did. Adam, I'm not sure if you knew who was on that committee for the construction manager at pool hiring, but I'm assuming that Tony probably pulled someone out from the construction energy industry to help in that committee.
Yeah, that's accurate. With all of our formal public RFQs or RFPs, we have a diverse panel, such as Teresa mentioned. Oftentimes we'll get subject matter experts from other agencies as well, to participate, with, relevant understanding of the scope of the RFP, but, a different perspective and limited sort of investment in it. Once we establish the on-call list, such as engineering, professional services, construction management, commissioning, et cetera, we will oftentimes enter into a negotiation for a project-specific proposal. And some of our larger projects will actually invite multiple firms who are already on the pre-approved list to come in and interview. And in those cases, it would be a similar format where there'd be multiple folks on the panel. Standard practice would be to include members outside of capital projects on that panel with relevant expertise, just really for that fundamental diversity of input, and just to document the decision making appropriately, and then still finally entering into negotiations for a professional services agreement.
So if we just grabbed like so we don't have to tax our memory too much. If we was to go back to the selection process for the CM on, say, Wild Creek, who was in the room?
So there was, again, we have a pool of qualified firms that were established from a previous public RFQ and a diverse panel where proposals were scored and the list of qualified firms was established. We invited, I believe at the time, 4 of those firms to submit proposals. A group of in-house and an external panel member evaluated those, invited 3 firms, I believe, to interview. And then from that, a selection was made, and the agreement was negotiated from there.
But I guess my question, Adam, is what I'm trying to figure out to make sure that this is an open and transparent selection process. Who was in the room for the selection? Who was your committee?
In that specific example, there were, I believe, 3 members of the capital projects department and 1 architectural consultant associated with that project, someone who would be working with that selected firm on that project throughout the duration of construction, with relevant subject matter expertise as well.
And are we talking about, is it senior staff that's in there? Is it, you know what I mean? Because what I'm trying to avoid here, make sure that we're avoiding here is, it's kind of like if I pull, 3 of my people, right, at A1 Steel, if I pull them into a room and we're making a selection process, and obviously I don't have the criteria that you have to deal with, but they're all going to agree with me. You know what I mean? So my concern is if we've got, 1 or 2 bosses in there and people that are, 2 or 3 levels below them, I'm trying to avoid just it turning into 1 or 2 people kind of making that selection. And my concern, Adam, and I know we've discussed this in the past, but my concern is we're not talking about handing out here a $100,000 contract. We're talking about signing $6 million contracts with, upwards of $6 million contracts with these companies. And I want to always avoid any even thought of any wrongdoing. And the best way to do that, that's why as contractors, we have to present 5% subcontractor list within a certain number of times. It's all an open and transparent process. I would really like to see you guys come up with a written rule. I'm not saying we've got to get, legislators or anything like that involved, but I would like to see us come up with a hard and fast written policy for selecting these contracts. And I don't know if we need to make it for, any contract over $500,000 or whatever. I just think it's in everybody's best interest to have some sort of policy in place for doing that, being we're spending public money.
Yeah, if I may speak to that, I mean, obviously Adam was in on that particular committee, but any committee that we normally or panel that we normally put together, it is senior level people typically. And if it is senior level people, it's not like, my 2 employees are in there with me, right? Like my underlings are in there with me. No, it's typically senior people. But following your point, I mean, it's probably not a bad idea to have a process in place. That is, so it's a standard process for every time.
On all of the public solicitations, the RFQs, even the one that's on the street currently, as Teresa mentioned, for commissioning and all of these, similar to our public works solicitations, our construction contract advertisements, these are administered by the purchasing department, independent of the capital projects department. So they're published, the questions, the panel members, the confidentiality agreements. The purchasing department is present during the interviews, the deliberations. They collect the proposal documents, the interview notes. All of those things are administered and overseen by the purchasing department, very similar to how our competitive construction contracts are bid and awarded and whatnot. To speak to this sort of hierarchy oversight, I believe there's actually a technical, whether it's an NRS requirement or an internal policy, that any individual cannot supervise a majority of the members of the panel. And I've actually run into that a time or two myself, where I was on a panel, and because technically per the org chart, I'm over, the entire department, I've had to either step off of a panel or add a member to a panel or something of that nature, because technically per the org chart, I supervise them. And I think that speaks to it, what I thought I heard from you, Mr. Ivory, that, we want the members to speak candidly. We want them, and as Teresa mentioned, these are subject matter experts. These are senior members associated with those projects whose voices are strong and relevant and are encouraged and feel confident voicing those opinions, and that their deliberation and input into the final decision is valued, ultimately enriching the final selection. So I hope that's helpful. I want to try to mostly assure that we are similar to what the audit reported around our bidding processes. We are very carefully supervised by our purchasing department, and that's for everyone's benefit.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Justin. We'd be more than happy to ask the purchasing department for any laws or regulations that are already in place. I suspect that there are. We just haven't been shown them, because they just they oversee everything as we go on every one of these anyway. So.
Well, and to be honest with you, on my part, if somebody asks me, well, how's it selected? I go, I don't know. They put a committee together and select it. You know what I mean? Because there is no hard, fast rule to it. And I understand we don't want to pigeonhole ourselves with a hard, fast rule, but also we want to have, in my opinion, I think we want to have some sort of structure in place so that it's transparent, so that they can see exactly what the process is. We use the same process each time, as close to that process as we can each time. And I personally, I think it's informational for us, but to be honest with you, I think it's a really good umbrella policy for staff more than anything else.
Sure.
There's a tremendous amount of black and white rules around how we select professional services. I mean, there's minimum mandatories associated with the total number of panel members, which we always exceed. I can say that. I've struggled with the purchasing department. You know, it's difficult to coordinate busy people's schedules to convene these committees. And oftentimes I've not been allowed to have a committee consisting of only the minimum mandatory number of participants. That would make life easier for me, but it does not go above and beyond that minimum mandatory. You know, what I'm saying is there's 5 people on the committee instead of 3 type of thing. Number of elements along those lines that purchasing administers that I think have really just become accustomed to because it is such a standard practice. You know, to somebody who's not as familiar as it, somebody that's not as familiar with it as we are, it might not be well understood. But, you know, we can go into more depth at a later time, but I feel pretty confident that through the oversight largely of the purchasing department and the various NRSs and school district policies associated with these professional service agreements, we are actually quite tightly constrained in how we can go about selecting and hiring these firms.
Okay, if you guys are comfortable with it, you know, like you say, at a later date, I would love to just see the process and how it's done, and perhaps you and I can sit down at a later date and just kind of go through it.
All right. Are there any other questions, or is there any public comment also?
No public comment.
Thank you. Any other questions by committee?
Move to approve.
I'll go ahead and second. Got a motion and a second.
And who was the motion from?
Councilmember Reese.
Thank you.
Yep. Second by Solero. Got a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Not seeing any. That passes unanimously. So with that, we will move on to a couple of information-only items, starting with 2.04, which is a presentation and discussion on the draft Washoe County School District Technology Master Plan. Mr. Searcy.
Okay, I'll kick this one off again for the group. Thank you. For the record, Adam Searcy with the school district. I want to highlight, you know, that as technology has continued to become a larger part of our academic environment, it has become ever more critical that we re-examine this aspect and create a stronger strategic plan around technology. Our leadership team at the school district has made great progress on that throughout 2019. And now during the current pandemic, it has accelerated this conversation a great deal. Here tonight, as the slide indicates, to present to you are several of those leadership team members that have been a part of this conversation. I'll turn it over now to our Chief Operating Officer, Pete Etchart, to kick it off.
Great, thank you, and good afternoon. It's good to see you all again, even if it is virtually. And I apologize that you did not receive this presentation beforehand in your packet. I can tell you we were working on it right up till this afternoon. But again, I am Pete Etchart. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for the district, and I am joined today by Mark Mathers, our Chief Financial Officer, and Chris Turner, our Chief Information Technology Officer. Now, Chris is relatively new to the district, having joined us in July of this year, and right out of the gate, Dr. Turner has been tasked to coordinate the creation of a comprehensive information technology plan for the district, and that's definitely no small undertaking. And I'm sure Superintendent McNeil would be the first to tell you that this is much needed and has been one of her priorities since becoming our superintendent. And this need has been only highlighted by the pandemic we see ourselves in now. So we are here today to discuss a specific portion of the plan, devices, and even more specifically, the funding of devices. So if you go to the next slide, Adam. So I'm going to begin this discussion with a little historical background on this. In October 2015, a year before WC1 went on the ballot, The district had approximately $73 million in remaining bonding capacity, and we were not sure at that time whether we would have any additional resources coming or not. At that time, the Oversight Panel for School Facilities and other community members met to prioritize where to utilize the remaining funds. One of the priorities was to install the hardware in our schools to make wireless connectivity a reality, which we did. Even with the limited funding we had, the committee knew this was a priority. When we later went to the voters in 2016, the main focus of WC1 was threefold. One was to deal with overcrowding in our schools. Two was to catch up on our critical repair needs backlog. And three was to work toward providing equity in our schools, meaning that every student, whether they go to a brand new school or a 100-year-old school, would have the same classroom experiences and opportunities. And that largely has to do with access to technology. Next slide. So since WC1 was passed, the renewal of the behind the walls, the IT infrastructure that makes all of this work, has been included in the capital renewal plan that you see every year. Fortunately, we have been able to increase this from about $1 million a year now to roughly $3 to $4 million a year in the capital renewal plan with the passage of WC1. Next slide. And lastly, in regards to background on this, capital funds have also been used to fund technology and devices as part of our new school and older school renovation projects. While this has been fantastic for our new and renovated schools, it has also created an inequity with our other schools and also exacerbates the issue of replacing existing technology as it ages. So we are working to address this as part of the district's IT strategic plan. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Turner to address this in more detail.
Okay, so being sure to unmute myself, as I always forget. As Pete and Adam already outlined, I'm Chris Turner. I'm Chief Information Officer for Washoe County School District. I'm happy to be here tonight. As also outlined, I joined the district on July 1st, and I inherited an initiative, a strategic technology plan. And while the process was ongoing, one thing that we recognized immediately was not only do we need a coherent plan, but more importantly, we needed to recognize that there was a challenge of sustainability. So we had traditionally up until now and currently, there is no centralized plan for refreshing technology for students or teachers at the district. Individual schools and departments are charged with refreshing their own technology, using their own operating budgets when available to refresh those devices. And what schools typically do is they cobble together general operating funds, they write for grants, and they use student activity funding in order to acquire new devices. And the nature of how those devices are refreshed and funded makes it erratic, unpredictable, and what we recognize is we need a coherent plan for the funding of the refresh moving forward. So we identified some goals. We worked with, as Pete outlined, we've been working together with the business department as well as academics to identify how we want to move forward with this. What do we want in terms of our students? How do we want instruction to look in the future? What we recognize is we want college and career readiness. We want our students to be ready to enter the workforce or to enroll in college and be ready and prepared to use technology, because as we discovered, and as I'll talk about some more, in March, the need was made ever more apparent to us. So how do we accomplish the career and college readiness and the students that is our objective? Is we create what we call not a one-to-one school necessarily like our new construction, because that is that has challenges related to finances. So what we've landed on is the idea that they're technology rich, where we don't necessarily have a device for every single student all the time, but that all students have devices available to them. And so part of that challenge is, or part of our goal for that is, we're creating a distance and hybrid learning program in order to move us not only sustain us now in our pandemic environment where we're in a distance learning environment, but also in the future when we want to be adaptable and ready to any students that might want to enroll in Washoe County schools but want a different educational experience than is traditionally offered in the classroom. So part of the problem is, or part of the solution is, the way we see it is, it's a logistical solution. We want to centralize acquisition. We want to remove the acquisition of devices from individual schools and school leadership and principals and make it more centralized. So what that does, it provides a much more coherent, predictable upgrade cycle for schools, for students, and for teachers. It helps us to better standardize on our uniform student device, and that when we do that, it eases the onboarding of the devices into the district. It helps us get the laptops in student hands much more rapidly when we use a standardized device. If we centralize the purchase and distribution of devices at central office instead of the school buildings, we can leverage potential cost advantages too. So when a school goes out and buys 30 devices, whereas we're proposing, anywhere from 5,000 to 10,000 a year, we can avail ourselves of the cost advantages that come with bulk purchasing. And finally, one of the ideas that isn't often discussed is when schools attempt to purchase their own devices, the principals are forced into a position of being the purchasers. And so we'd like to lift that burden off of school leadership and return them to a more traditional principal teacher role, and then have us handle the acquisition piece. Next slide, please, Adam. So what did we learn this year? So we knew that we had a strategic technology plan that was important for how technology was going to be integrated in the classroom and how technology would be used in schools. But what March revealed was there's a tremendous need for us to have a much more coherent plan and for students to have access to technology. We knew that technology is integral to the classroom instruction, and we knew that we had to provide access to devices that are up to date and operational. But we also recognize that there's budget challenges, that there is no mechanism in place for the renewal of these devices. So the March transition to distance learning revealed that there are technology gaps in the district. As has already been outlined, we have the brand new schools that have a 1-to-1 student to device ratio inventory. And then we have very old schools that don't have access to those types of technology opportunities. So we recognize that some of those older schools are undersourced, and there's inequities in place, and we want to make sure that everybody has adequate and equitable access to technology. So in the process, what March also revealed to us was we didn't have an adequate inventory tool on site to let us know what technology existed in the district. We had pockets of spreadsheets that indicated that this school owned this many devices and these devices were loaned out to these students, but we had no central tool that informed us how many devices we had and where they might be and how old they might be. So in March, we began the development of a database that helps us. We used multiple systems to populate this database to inform us on how many devices we actually own. And while that database is still being developed, because we can't tell at this point, we haven't gotten into schools to be able to tell which device is a teacher laptop and which device is a student laptop. At this point, we have gotten to the point where we know that we own 48,000 laptops. We know that there are 4,000 teachers and 60,000 plus students. So we know that there is an inequity there, that we don't have enough laptops for the majority of our students. But out of that 48,000, as you can see from the slide, nearly 12% of the laptops were purchased prior to 2014. So we have not only a shortfall in terms of laptops per student device, but many of them, nearly 12%, are older than 6 years. So we have a tremendous need in terms of laptops, the sheer number of them, but also the currency of them, so that they can run the multimedia rich applications that our students and our students require and our teachers are using in the classroom. Another challenge outlined on the slide is one aspect that was revealed by our families is a lack of connectivity. With the high number of families that lack home connectivity, we've been forced to purchase 3,000 mobile hotspots, but as part of Nevada's T-Mobile settlement, we also got 3,000 hotspots for free. But the continued connectivity needs of our families will continue outside of the pandemic, because if we move to this distance and hybrid learning environment, the families that will participate in those types of learning situations will still need connectivity, and will still need to fund that as well. So we've used a variety of funding sources, grant funds, in order to acquire the Wi-Fi hotspots and the nearly 20,000 laptops that we will be bringing into the district from beginning this past July up until this upcoming January. But those needs will continue. As you can recognize, if we have nearly 12% of our laptop fleet is over 6 years old, we have an ongoing need. So our proposal is that we use the monies available here to have a stable renewal process. And Mark Mathers is joining us, Chief Financial Officer, to discuss the financial pieces.
Thanks, Chris. So again, Mark Mathers, CFO for the district. So as Chris said, there's a tremendous number of devices that will need a systematic cyclical replacement over the years. And depending on the life cycle of those devices, roughly we're talking about $4 to $5 to $6 million per year for a reasonable cyclical replacement or refresh program. So that's obviously a heavy lift. But we began looking at this issue a number of months ago. We did an assessment of our capital funding sources that included bond counsel, that included our municipal financial advisor, J&A Consulting, who advises us on our long-term debt program, and brainstormed about potential funding sources within the capital program. Just to be clear, these are an eligible capital expense. We've confirmed that with bond and tax counsel. But through that assessment of our available funding sources, this is kind of a broad overview, and then we'll do a deep dive over the next several slides. But what we are not recommending is using WC1 sales tax revenues. We want to preserve that revenue source for primarily new construction of schools and other district facilities. For a variety of reasons, we don't want to touch that source, if at all possible, which then leads us to look at our property taxes that we collect through our school district debt rate. Our rate in Washoe County for school district debt is 38.85 cents per $100 of assessed valuation. You see that on your tax bill. That generates roughly $65 million per year to the district that we use to pay for debt service of our rollover bonds. But as we'll talk about over the next several slides, there is an opportunity there of unbudgeted revenues. These are revenues that generate from that source that have never been budgeted annually for rollover bond debt service, nor do you see it in our 5-year capital improvement program. So we're talking about a source that does not sacrifice the funding we currently schedule for our long-term debt to pay for facilities such as O'Brien Middle School. That'll be funded by rollover bonds. So there's no impact to the CIP program by what we're going to recommend to you, just to be clear. But again, based on that assessment and legal analysis we did, NRS is very clear that equipment is an eligible expense of the property tax source. And Bond Counsel has confirmed that equipment includes computers, laptops, and other electronic devices. So we've kind of checked the box that this is a legal, eligible, permissible use. And then lastly, we looked at several smaller revenue sources, trying to, again, cobble together a financing plan. We had one source of lease revenue that kind of dropped off, unfortunately, but we do collect lease revenue on cell towers. We lease school district sites to cell tower vendors, and that is another eligible source that we'll go into. So next slide, we'll start doing this deep dive. So the first source we looked at was the interest earnings on our property tax debt service fund. So this is the fund where the 38.85 cents revenues are deposited. And this is the fund that pays debt service on those rollover bonds. The district has taken a very financially conservative approach and has never budgeted investment earnings in that fund. And as you can see here, we've generated pretty significant interest earnings over the last 3 years. However, this is a somewhat volatile revenue source, unfortunately, based on the Fed's monetary policies. So we went from interest rates in the 2.5%, even climbing up as close to 3% on 5-year securities to now less than 0.5%. So as you can see for fiscal year 21, we foresee a significant drop in that revenue source, which makes it a little problematic to scoop off these monies, but it certainly is an available revenue source that, again, we've never budgeted. It stays in the debt service fund that we do not program currently for capital projects in our CIP. So historically, those interest earnings have simply gone to the fund balance of this fund and have never been touched. Next slide. Similarly, when we issue rollover bonds, we always plan a contingency or buffer amount so that if property taxes aren't realized at what the Department of Taxation and the county treasurer has forecasted, we have adequate coverage to pay for debt service. And that coverage amount can vary. Sometimes it's 10% or more, other times a little less. But that coverage or buffer, if realized, is basically extra funding that, again, the district has never programmed in the CIP for use of. So in other words, in fiscal year 20, we saw roughly 62 million of property tax revenues and had debt service of roughly 55 million. And so there was more than $7 million that basically reverted to fund balance. And this was somewhat purposeful by the district. We've wanted to maintain an adequate reserve in the debt service fund in case we saw another great recession and another dive of property tax or assessed valuations. And that fund balance now has built up to 52 million. Our statutory minimum reserve is roughly 21 million. And that's based on a fairly complex formula. We think 52 million represents a pretty safe number that is a little shy of 1 year's worth of debt service, which we think is appropriate. And this is one of the pluses that the district has going for it. When we talk to rating agencies, on our debt rating when we sell bonds. They absolutely look at this number and make sure that we have what they consider a reasonable debt service, a fund balance. And that's why we were recently upgraded to AA across the board from all three rating agencies. But at this point, I think we feel comfortable peeling off this coverage amount. And per a 2015 statutory change, we can in fact use that coverage amount for pay-as-you-go projects. And so this represents another, again, potential funding source for device replacement and some acquisition that does not impact what we have historically appropriated here in the district for capital projects. So it's never been factored into our planning going forward for new school construction or capital renewal or other projects. I'm going to stop there because I'm going a little bit fast, just out of respect for your time. Perhaps this is a little complicated, so I'll just stop and ask if there are any questions on this idea.
Any questions from the committee members? Doesn't look like. Oh, Mr. Ivory, looks like you got a question.
Sorry, guys. I gotta go and look at this because I just want to correct a few things because I think, Mr. Mathers, I think you would agree with me that these monies aren't earmarked for this, for a capital improvement, but that's where they would eventually end up, correct?
Well, they might or they might not. I mean, the district could choose to continue to increase its fund balance for whatever contingencies in the future it might see. I mean, that's what it's done.
Let's go back to 2015 when the percentage was changed on how much you had to have overage. And the reason behind that was because we were out of money for funding for capital improvements. So the state allowed, if I remember right, the state allowed us to change that percentage so that we could free up some more money to build some things because we were out of money. Am I getting that close?
There was a statutory change in 2015. I'm not sure if I totally concur with the reason that you're citing, but there was you're correct. There were statutory changes to that minimum reserve requirement. Yes.
And so what ends up happening is these overflows, basically, right, of piles of money that we're collecting that aren't necessarily earmarked for any particular construction project still sits in a construction account that if indeed we hit our capacity on, we built everything out and had no more bondable money, we could in theory then tap those resources to continue on if we needed another school built or an addition or whatever on the construction project. So I just feel like it might be a little disingenuous to say that this money was never earmarked for construction. I don't disagree with you with the point you're making. I just kind of disagree with you with the actual outcome of that money is it's in reserves for the construction project of that. And I would caution the committee to, before we move forward with an IT program, last meeting we had, all of a sudden we're purchasing buses with capital improvement money. And I get the fact that that money doesn't come out of WC1. I get the fact this money doesn't come out of WC1. But I do know that the voters' intention on WC1 was to protect the money for capital improvements, for building schools for our kids. That's what the money was earmarked for. And I don't think you could, I know there's no way to go back and re-ask the question, but I do want to caution us to, if you used to ask most voters, was the intent on WC1 to earmark that money for capital improvements so we could take the other capital improvements money and start to purchase things that used to be covered under the general fund that no longer are because we're so tight on the general fund? I'm not saying that I disagree with purchasing the IT or the buses through these funds, but what I'm saying is, what was the intent? Because that's what our job is is to oversee the intent of that WC1 money.
Thanks.
I'll step down off my soapbox.
All right. Any other questions for Mr. Mathers before he continues on? Doesn't look like it, Mark. So,
Okay.
Mr. Mathers, if you wouldn't mind continuing.
Sure. Next slide. Covers kind of the last recommended funding source here, which is, again, cell tower lease revenues. The chart at the bottom of the slide shows you total revenues, so not a huge amount here. But historically, the district has split these revenues between the school at which the cell tower is located and the building and sites fund. Some schools have chosen to use their half of the revenues more than other schools who have let that fund balance build and haven't had many uses for those funds. But the concept here is that we would go to the board in January to discuss a policy decision to commit that entire amount of lease revenue to IT device replacement versus splitting it 50-50 as we do currently. And so then my last slide kind of adds it all together. So what our recommendations for capital funding sources would be is to begin appropriating our interest earnings. We've conservatively forecasted just $250,000 of interest earnings for that. Then, as we've talked about, utilizing some amount of that buffer or contingency that we always build in to pay for debt service for device replacement. We've kind of estimated between $2 and $4 million, and that will just fluctuate based on any number of factors, but primarily just our level of property tax revenues as it may fluctuate going forward. And then lastly, the third revenue source of committing the entire amount of cell tower lease revenue of $150,000 per year. So these are annual amounts. And so the total recommended sources for a comprehensive district-wide device replacement program at schools would amount to anywhere between $2.35 million and $4.35 million a year. And you'll see the note there that prior to utilizing any of that property tax revenue for pay-as-you-go device replacement, we would make sure that we pay all of the debt service in the current fiscal year. So all of the debt service due from July 1 through June 30th would be paid before any monies would be directed to an account for device replacement. And we'd obviously ensure that we maintain our required reserve under NRS 350.020. So in essence, the first lien on any property revenues has to be and will be debt service. That's the purpose of that source. And again, 2015 legislation now allows us to utilize it for pay-as-you-go projects, but obviously we have pledges and a lien on those monies first for debt service. So that concludes my portion of the presentation and those recommended funding sources.
So, Mr. Mathers, I just want to, kind of touch a little bit on Committee Member Ivory. So really what we're talking about, though, at the beginning of this was the equity of all of our schools. So while I appreciate that the tax initiative, WC1, has provided for the construction, what we've also done with the school district now is create an inequity in technology and the way kids are learning. So it seems to me that this is an appropriate type of plan, at least to get the equity across all of the schools, much like the revitalization program, which is also funded out of the WC1 funds. So I can fully understand and get from point A to point B as the presentation has laid out here. So I agree. There's always this slippery slope, but I think at the end of the day, the intent of what we're trying to accomplish for all of our children is a safe, equal environment for them to learn within. And so, I want to throw those comments out there as well. And as I understand, this is an informational item to us, simply to kind of get us understanding what the thought process is. But ultimately, at the end of the day, this is a decision by the school district board of trustees, as I understand. Is that correct, Mr. Mathers?
That is correct, sir.
Thanks.
Hi, this is Sophie Cardinell. Sorry, if I may,
Come
real
on in.
quick. I also wanted to point out that we're not actually using the WC1 funds, correct, Mark? It's the property tax revenue that we'd be pulling from.
That's absolutely correct. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Member Bybee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would agree with you. Equity has been created, or equity not happening in our schools with the new schools is definitely a factor that maybe 8 months ago we would be concerned about, but today we're in a whole different world. And right now we're talking about, without the IT and the wireless, we're talking about quality of education that right now our high school and middle school kids are at home. They're total distance learning. So it's an inequity even within schools. The schools that the kids all have one-on-one is not a problem, but a lot of other schools that aren't the oldest, that are that don't have Wi-Fi, that don't have the devices. And so it's even more critical now than ever that our IT has to be upgraded, has to be better than it is, because we've got kids that are falling through the cracks because they're at homes that don't have devices or don't have Wi-Fi, and also maybe don't have someone at home helping them navigate your distance, whether it's hybrid or full at home learning. I mean, it's critical right now, because I'm concerned how many kids we're losing and the quality of education, let alone all the social emotional learning, all of the connections, the detriment of them being at home. For me is a huge concern, and I understand we are where we are, and that's a separate topic. But on the Wi-Fi and the devices, critical. But I guess my question, Mr. Mathers, would be on the Wi-Fi. You talk about the devices that you've purchased, and I know it's gone on buses. Are they separate devices that go to homes? And then how do you do? And would that be covered? Is that if a hotspot has to be purchased, when a lot of cases it does, would that fall under this? And then how do you decide? Because the need far outweighs even these dollars that we're looking at. So how do you decide priority wise who's going to get the devices and the hotspots when you do allocate the funds to do this? Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Great questions. I'm going to take the first part having to do with funding, and maybe I could turn it over to Dr. Turner to talk about the distribution of those devices. But I'm glad you asked about this, because maybe it's semantics, but we're not actually purchasing the devices. We actually pay a monthly subscription to T-Mobile, and also for areas where T-Mobile doesn't have good coverage, Verizon. We actually are required to turn those units back in. And so a distinction here is we are not able to use capital funding sources for those Wi-Fi hotspots. They are not a capital expense because there's a monthly subscription fee that falls currently on CARES Act funding and grant funding. Ultimately, the general fund will have to pick up those monthly fees, which for 3,000 units is $720,000 a year. So for 6,000 units, it would be $1.4 million a year that the general fund would have to legally and will have to pick up. So that's just a burden on the general fund for us to cover in future years. I will turn it over to Chris to talk about how we've distributed those devices this school year.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. We tried to be really strategic about planning for the connectivity needs of our students. So we purchased 25 smart bus units, as you pointed out. We parked some in central locations where we knew that there was over-the-air connectivity and there was high need in the local population. We worked with some of our community partners in the Reno Housing Authority to identify those neighborhoods. And that's, I think, 6 or 7 of those units were sort of permanently parked in locations, and then 18, 19, or 20 of them accompanied students on bus rides that met certain criteria, longer than 30 minutes, areas of high need. What we found is families found some of those parked smart bus locations inconvenient to use because we only park them there because they're battery operated, and they're sitting in district vehicles. They're only good until the battery runs out, and then we have to bring them back and recharge them. And so some of the hours that we posted just didn't meet the needs of our families. And so we're rethinking that now that we're on distance learning. For the secondary students, we are developing a new location for those smart bus units that were accompanying students on the bus rides. And we will park them in parking lots of the closed schools, schools closed because of distance learning. And we'll advertise those locations next week once we finally arrive at the destinations. In terms of the hotspots, as Mark pointed out, there's 6,000 total hotspots. We went through an initial distribution based on expressed need and survey data that we collected in the spring and the summer. And so we distributed the initial 3,000 hotspots to all of the school buildings based on those needs. The subsequent 3,000 that we got as part of the T-Mobile Nevada settlement, the majority, they reside here in the IT department, and because they're finite and expensive, we distribute those on a case-by-case basis. We've advertised the process to school leadership. They email me and they say, I have 11 families that need a hotspot. Could you please send 11 over? And that's the example of how we distribute them. We have approximately 2,500 left, but they do us no good to sit here. So principals know all they have to do is ask, and we'll send them out. So like I said, it does a student and a family no good for us to sit on the remaining inventory. So when there is an express need, we send them out as soon as possible.
Can I ask you a quick question on the smart buses? So is the coverage of that hotspot a certain distance from the buses? Because you talked about the devices on the buses. Well, if the kids aren't going to school, they're not riding the buses.
Right.
So that doesn't help, except at elementary, it would help. But for the middle and high school, and does a family go park in a parking lot near the smart bus? And then do you have to worry about people congregating?
Yeah, so that is a concern. There's a number of concerns as we move into the winter months and we move into distance learning in terms of the smart bus locations. And when I say smart bus for the Wi-Fi, it's really the size of a lunch pail. It's not an entire bus. It's just a little boxed unit. They advertise connectivity for a couple dozen users, but obviously the smart bus units are more robust than individual hotspot that we would send home with a student, which can handle 1 or 2 students at a time. The smart bus units can handle a couple dozen students at a time. But obviously with the more students, with the more connections to those smart bus units, the performance is degraded. So that's a concern. The concern of congregating is a concern in the COVID environment. We don't want people congregating, but we're hoping that the idea that they would gather around the connectivity, the smart bus location, they'd be in their cars so that they'd be necessarily isolated from other people from different households. The other complication, as I mentioned, is we're entering into colder months, and people might not want to congregate at a smart bus location in a parking lot for a number of hours in terms of, you turn your car off and you might get cold too. So there's a lot of factors that go into the smart bus deployments that we're sensitive to. We recognize that, but we felt like the smart bus units might reach a greater good than the hotspots, and that's why we tried 25 of them.
Okay, thank you.
Committee Member Ivory.
Okay, I definitely agree with Chairman Salerno. There's certainly a need here for equality among all the schools, and especially when we're building, like almost like compared to the old schools, these are like super schools that we're building now. So I absolutely get that. My question for Mr. Mathers is, when we allocate the $2 to $4 million per year on for this program, do we start off in the first year buying, because usually IT, like when we purchase a lot of IT, it starts off with a whole lot of, computers and stuff like that. And then it turns into kind of service agreement type stuff after that. Is that what we're looking at here?
No, we're looking at actual replacement of as the devices age, and whatever that point is, 5, 6, 7 years, we're talking about replacing them and hopefully upgrading them, and hopefully at a cheaper cost than our initial acquisition cost. But we're really talking about a refresh program where those devices would be replaced over time. And I guess to your point, or to answer how this might work, we have procured a number of devices this year from CARES Act money, from the generous contribution of the city of Reno from their CARES Act monies. We've bought, as the slide said, more than 20,000 devices. So there's not going to be, I think perhaps you're kind of alluding to an initial purchase frenzy or a bubble of devices we have to buy. We've bought them through other sources. And so it will probably be a couple years before we really have any serious replacement costs that we need to look at, other than what Chris had mentioned in terms of our 12% of our really old devices. So it'll probably be several years before we would even need to spend in the neighborhood of $4 million a year for device replacement. But in the meantime, that fund balance of that debt service fund can continue to build and be available, based on needs.
Then
I hope that answered your question.
No, that it absolutely does. And so I think it brings me into my next point is, why don't I think we would be better served with this money to use it as an incentive on, say, a grant match. And the reason I say that is because my feeling on it is, once you start to just provide this, right, something that our staff in the past has always worked hard to get grant money to scrounge that stuff up, why not leverage this money as grant match money? So it still incentivizes our staff to go out and find ways to get those resources. And then if we get, one of the schools says, hey, we figured out how to get a grant for $600,000, and if we had another $600,000 from this program, we could go buy new for our entire school where it was out of our reach before. But my 2 cents is, if you're going to create a fund like this, then use that fund to work in unison with the system that we used to have also.
So I'll just respond. I think that's a great idea and a great thought. And we always look to leverage our money like that if possible. The only thing I would say is the state is actually reducing state grants significantly. We saw a cut to our grant funding of $16 million this summer due to the special session. There may be, though, additional federal grants, and I think your idea is really good, to if at all possible, leverage our monies with other grant sources to extend out what we can buy. So it's a great idea.
Well, and just because in my experience with the grant money, a lot of times on the federal grants, you can't get the federal grant if you don't have matching funds from a local source anyway. So it might also make it easier to get that grant money, because obviously if we're not getting it, somebody is.
All right. Are there any other questions on this item? Not Not seeing any. I think we'll thank you very much for the information and the discussion. And I'd like to move on to item 2.05, which is a presentation and discussion on schedule and budget costs associated with the Debbie Smith Career and Technical Academy. So, Mr. Searcy. You're still on mute, Adam.
So he's on mute, but this is really my item anyway. And thank you for having me tonight. My name is Tammy Zimmerman, and I'm the Deputy Chief Facilities Management Officer. And just to bring you an update on our schedule and where we're at with Debbie Smith, with the construction schedule and the design schedule. So next slide, Adam. Just wanted to remind you, it's been a while, to talk about, again, what the academies will be. They'll be the Culinary Arts and Nutrition, Engineering and Robotics, Marketing, Medical Careers, Practical Nursing, Biomedical, Veterinary Science, Ornamental Horticulture, and Greenhouse Management. And there'll be a Skilled Trades, Construction Technology, and Welding Technology, as well as a teaching training for the elementary level. Next slide. So we're in the schematic design phase right now, and we anticipate finishing that the first part of February of 2021. We will then move into our design development phase and anticipate finishing that the end of July of 2021, and then move to the construction development phase to finish in approximately February of 2022, and then go out to bid for that. But this is the construction schedule, and we worked through some conceptual designs with our architect, as well as our construction manager at risk, our architect Ben Wirt-Bagodi, and our construction manager at risk Q&D, as well as through a third-party estimator, OCMI, to look at some of those concepts to make sure that we were in line with the initial budget that we put out in the WC1 initiative, which we've kept in that, and we are actually working with this concept, and I'll go through it for you. In June of 2022, when this campus is vacated by the Proctor Hug staff and students, and they get to move to their new beautiful building over off of Sullivan Lane, then we'll start working on this campus. We did an initial building study, and we found some of the buildings not to be able to be brought up to current code. So we will be demolishing some of them. We will demolish the library building, which is in the center of the campus here with the red explosion on it, as well as building B, which is over here on the side, and building C, which has all of that on there. That is to make way for a new building in the center of the campus to connect all those buildings with an interior connection so that they're not out on the campus outside. We will also be demolishing the admin building up top and the cafeteria building. Then after we're done demolishing those, we will start abating building A, where my cursor is, and the gymnasium building and the existing IA building. This IA building holds the existing CTE academies in there. The culinary kitchen is in there. There's an early childhood center in there that will turn into the teaching and learning center. And then there's also some medical and some science labs in there that will be remaining, but there's still a good portion in the center here that will be abated with that. And that'll take us through September of 2022. Next slide. In September of 2022, we will have demolished those buildings in the center, and we're going to start the new construction of the new building that will connect this entire campus and give it a heart of the campus. We'll remodel the gymnasium. It needs a little bit of a remodel to house, where my cursor is, the construction technology and the welding. That's currently the small gym, and it's a large space so that we can be putting in a welding and bring in big pieces of equipment to do that work. We will also be installing or remodeling the A building up on the top northeast center and right there. Yep, you got it, Adam. And that will be remodeling for the RISE building, the RISE department to move into, and those are our adult students that come back to get their high school diploma. And that I'll talk about that a little bit later on in the presentation. Then in the east parking lot, we'll be installing a temporary administration suite and a temporary cafeteria, because those pieces will be permanently housed into the new building in the center of the campus. That'll be the heart. And then in August of 2023, we anticipate opening those buildings that remain, the gym, the IA, and the building A, to approximately 400 students, which will be freshmen and sophomore, and they will be able to take the same programs in there. We're working with the CTE department to make sure that we have available spaces for them to start their programs in there. And those programs are listed on there on the slide of this slide that tells you which ones they'll be able to do. The only one we don't think we would have enough space for is the robotics. And that's because it goes into the new building on the bottom floor to have large openings and doors to be able to get those robotics in. Next slide, Adam. So in December of 2023, at the end of the semester, we anticipate opening this new building. This new building is to transverse the property from north to south and to connect it because of the grades of the existing site. We will be removing the temporary administration suite and the cafeteria, and they'll be able to come into this new building and have that in those new building spaces. We'll be completing the site work before that second semester, and then the RISE, the adult education, will be moving to that A building to take advantage of possibly some of the programs and overlaps that we may have there for career tech for them as well. You'll notice on this plan that we have a new boardroom slated to go onto this campus on the top northern portion of the campus. And that is to also allow the school to use the boardroom for their presentations. Career and technical education students use and pitch their ideas, and they have thesis type projects that they pitch to people to gain credit for education. Next slide, Adam. This next slide is just an easier view of what the schedule for construction would look like with that building, and able to overlap the design and see how those buildings will come on with the different colors and that. So it's just an easier way to read it than going through all those on the side of the slides. That completes my presentation. Did you guys have any questions or concerns with those items?
Member Bybee?
Yeah, Tammy, I just had, am I muted?
Nope, I can hear you.
Oh, okay. Just one quick question. It's showing the 400 freshmen and sophomore initially opening. What is going to be the total campus capacity once everything's finished? And then how will admissions go? First come, first serve? Do they have to qualify to get in each of the programs? I know that's probably separate, but capacity for sure.
So the campus is planned for a maximum capacity of 950 students. Okay. CTE campuses, because of their lab spaces and that, they use larger spaces. So you won't be able to fit what this traditionally holds as a high school because of those spaces. CTE programs are by basically an application, and you do an interview through the process through the CTE department to be entered into those programs. And they actually give you like a first choice, second choice, and they put you in those programs as they have space. This actually takes a couple of those academies from our existing AACT campus that are pretty full. We get the ag and the animal science, and the greenhouse is going to move over here, and that's pretty full right now. So this will allow them to have more space to bring in more students. There's also the hospitality and the kitchen that'll allow them to have more culinary over at this side as well, because they always have a need and a wait list for items like that. So this actually helps expand some of those to allow more students to be into those programs.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
All right. Any other questions on Debbie Smith? Not seeing any. Thank you, Ms. Zimmerman. Appreciate the update. With that, we'll move on to item 2.06, which is a presentation and discussion on the schedule and budgeted costs associated with the replacement of the William O'Brien Middle School. Mr. Searcy.
All right, thank you. Correctly unmuted. I'll give this one a go myself. Thank you. For the record, Adam Searcy, Chief of Facilities. Thanks for being here. I also want to recognize a couple in the cheap seats that had a lot to do with getting us here today. I've got Kevin Kemner, Associate Principal with TSK Architects, Kurt Perriott, Pre-Construction Manager with Core Construction, and Justin Peterson, President of O'Connor Construction Management Incorporated, all on the line here this evening. But I'm going to burn through the slide deck for everybody. There's a lot of information both in this presentation and attached to the agenda here this evening. We've been discussing this project as a committee as well for quite some time, over a year, every meeting, trying to develop a steady plan and remain consistent with our progress. Tonight, we're going to go through that history just a little bit and conclude with the final budget recommendation for all remaining construction on the project. So our outreach and engagement here has been pretty intensive, but particularly on this project, more of an infill construction project. And of course, eventually on an active campus, it's been very critical. We've actually been on public meeting agendas, both at this public CFPC, Capital Funding Protection Committee meeting, and Board of Trustees 6 times over the last year. We've held 2 in-person public town hall type events at the school in the last year. We've presented to the City of Reno Council, as well as North Valley's Neighborhood Advisory Board meeting. And we've gone through a site plan review process with the City of Reno as well. So really just sort of that's like the formal engagement with the community. But also as we continue to engage with the Neighborhood Homeowners Association and finalize the land acquisition with the HOA, we have engaged extensively with those residents. The HOA consists of over 1,600 residents immediately in the Stead area. And these HOA members have received somewhere in the no fewer than 5 direct mailers, multiple door hangers and postcards, countless social media posts, and soon will or have already received phone calls and emails related to this project and associated with the HOA. We're actually going to be hosting a media event specifically targeted at this project in the HOA next Monday to further promote the project and the partnership. And last but not least, really the engagement with the current middle school staff and the student and parent community there, knowing that they're going to live in this school and they're going to live in the existing school while we're building the new one, has been tremendous, both with Principal Melinda Baker's engagement during design, enhancing the quality of the finished product, but also the engagement with the students and staff, making them ready for construction, but also laying the foundation for a scenario where the construction experience will actually enrich the academic experience while it's underway. So just wanted to highlight that. As with all of our public outreach, it's fundamentally intended to enrich the project, both during the design phase, during the construction phase, and to make this something that is a community effort and is proud of for many decades to come. So on the next slide, again, still kind of in the summary phase. Back in August 2020, the committee heard more about this project being delivered in 2 phases. The design overall is essentially complete at this time. But back in August, the committee approved the construction phase funding for GMP 1, Guaranteed Maximum Price 1. That's the first construction project associated with this scope. It's much smaller, really consisting only of building pad, mass grading, building pad establishment for the rest of the project. Since that time, we've been issued a construction permit, contracted for all of the work, and actually just began initial groundbreaking activities this week out there on site. So we're well positioned for success, as noted on this slide. Under budget, local subcontractors, and the community and the site will experience dramatic changes over the coming months as we begin to develop the existing rear of the property. So as I mentioned, the overall design is essentially complete. The remaining scope, GMP2, has been submitted for permit to the City of Reno, and we'll be actively working with them to finalize any comment revisions and potentially look to advertise that scope in the first quarter of 2021. So a big part of all of our new school projects consists of furnitures, fixtures, and equipment. We talk about this consistently and refer to it as FF&E. The information that we presented in August 2020, again, to lay the foundation for this, describes how the existing FF&E in the current O'Brien Middle School will be itemized, selected for redistribution throughout the rest of the school district, salvaged, and included in the new school or otherwise. So that's an extensive effort that we've already kind of begun to catalog. But the majority of this budget will consist of new FF&E items, as well as, of course, school district staff and vendor labor necessary to inventory and install all of this work. Again, I'm going to refer to this repeatedly tonight. This is a new prototype design, a new building, but it is based on the same educational specifications that our recent past middle schools were based on. And as such, we'll have the same spaces, the pieces and parts, and areas that those schools have and are planned to be furnished in a similar manner. So building on the detailed knowledge that we've gained from past middle school construction experiences, we wanted to show the actual expenditures, both in equipment or FF&E, as well as staff and vendor labor, time and expenses. These actual expenditures, coupled with some of the unique aspects to this project, the cost savings potentially associated with the reuse or relocated existing FF&E, the effort associated with that intensive cataloging, move out, on top of the new purchase, the regular acquisition, inventory, and installation of the FF&E, all kind of fed into the budget. There is a bit more detailed estimate included in the packet. We've also seen some mild supply chain issues associated with FF&E and price escalation, as to be expected, leading us to the budgetary recommendation for this aspect here tonight at $5.9 million. So again, lining up with what we've seen previously, some of the considerations I just mentioned, what we saw in August, and what we're going to see later on this project. So just moving on, again, worth mentioning, this particular item we've agendized for information and discussion. The action associated with these recommendations will come in the next item on the agenda, but please feel free to interject with any questions as they come to mind. So moving forward, talking a little bit more about construction professional services. So we've seen this breakdown on past new projects, same general categories of efforts as with all of our major projects. Significant consultant support is warranted to ensure the quality, schedule, and budget is safeguarded for the owner and the taxpayers. Some of the primary services that we typically receive external service on include construction management, geotechnical, structural inspections, also building commissioning and hazardous material testing and oversight is important on this one, as with the demolition scope associated with the new, existing building will be much more intensive on the hazmat side than a standard new build project. So similar to the FF&E category, we do have significant historical information to draw from. Every project is different, but trying to summarize these actual costs on past middle schools and illustrate them for comparison purposes. We also included a detailed breakdown of past and other additional major school projects, WCSD projects in your packet. And I also wanted to note that most of the permitting and other fees that have been funded out of construction professional services in the past, in this instance, are actually being funded out of the design phase project budget. So that, as well as some of the other complexities associated with this project, a smaller footprint or a tighter footprint on an active school campus, and then a subsequent demolition component unique to this project versus some of these other projects, a slightly extended total project duration because of that trailing demolition and reconstruction phase. All of that information really led into the final recommended budget for all construction professional services on this project at $3.4 million. Again, similar to FF&E, this not only includes our external vendors and consultants who support us in these efforts, but occasionally miscellaneous fees and all of our staff time. Oftentimes, the staff time is going to come in the form of coordination of that FF&E installation and things of that nature when we get closer to that final punch list, that move-in period when the contractor's really moved away from active campus and the school district is really taken over before we open those doors. So again, you'll see this later in the slide deck, but our final recommendation for this aspect of the construction budget is at $3.4 million. So moving into some of the past presentations related to the construction budget overview. I want to refer to the next several slides specifically when I say construction budget. It's primarily going to be contracted through core construction, but it is intended to refer to all of the remaining project costs through the final completion of the entire project. So when we met in 2019, and we first looked back to February 2020, we described at this time the inclusion of the full ed spec or some additional spaces in the school that would put it on equal footing from pieces and parts or a spaces standpoint with the current middle school prototype. And with that, we introduced a probable total construction budget of between 70 and 77 million. This was back in February 2020. Building on that, in June 2020, we were before this committee, getting our first glimpse of preliminary exterior renderings of the building. At that time, we were dealing with approximately 50% level designs and presented estimated total construction budget at between 75 and 78.5 million. Moving ahead into August 2020, these are clips from the presentation that we gave in August. But at that time, we saw the first glimpse of the 3D video rendering. If you guys recall or have seen that since, it's still available on our website. But a tremendous fly through of the building at about 75% level design. At that time, we presented a recommended budget for the construction, FF&E, and professional services associated with this initial scope. As I described, a much smaller portion of the total project. That was approved and has since been contracted under budget and is underway. But at that time, the total project construction budget was presented at an estimated 76 to 79 million. You know, and at that time, we also discussed the trend, the upward trend of those estimates, and had been at that time, and we're discussing some aggressive, value engineering, cost constraining measures to keep this project within the available funds and keep it on track. So that's where we've come from, February, June, August. That really brings us to the present time. So with this design essentially complete, we've conducted a full budget estimate with core construction as well as independently with OCMI, O'Connor Construction Management. They submitted their estimates separately to the school district, and then we met as a group to discuss those discrepancies, disagreements, and opportunities for the project. Both of these budgets are also included in your packet and are extremely detailed. They're also within a high degree of agreement. Also informing this budget tonight and included in your packet is a detailed market study, which was conducted also by OCMI for this project. It describes, as many of you are aware, that essentially while so much of our economy is struggling and will continue to be hindered by the impacts of COVID-19, that the construction industry as a whole, and in particularly Northern Nevada, has not been severely impacted and looks to be relatively strong and healthy moving into 2021. So again, just an important reference point that always goes into informing not only our unit prices, but some of our contingencies associated with escalation and things like that, but before we go out to bid. So since the budget for GMP1 was previously approved, technically the action recommended this evening in item 2.07 is for a construction budget of $73.6 million. However, for completeness sake, I wanted to highlight that the final total recommended budget, including the previously approved amounts, come to a total of $76.85 million. So kind of using that as a reference point, that talking apples to apples, when I say total construction budget, 76.85 in comparison to what we've presented previously, and demonstrating really the consistency that this team has strived for as we've progressed through the design. Again, now essentially complete, save for the building review comments. So, and finally, I really feel like this is an important point that I try to emphasize every time we come forward. This is a budget. We absolutely intend to beat it, deliver this project under budget, and that all construction will be publicly advertised and competitively awarded. That's something that's very important and actually brings a tremendous amount of value to us in future steps. So in speaking of that value, I really wanted to take a moment to highlight and illustrate some of the efficiencies and value that we have strived as a team to bring to this design and this project. It's important to note again that this school will have the same pieces and parts as past middle schools, the same areas, the same student capacity as the 3 recent middle schools that we've constructed. However, with less extraneous area, a smaller total building footprint, and other more cost-effective design solutions, we were able to quantitatively demonstrate an improved degree of value to the school district and the public in a few different ways here you see. I wanted to highlight specifically the dollar per square foot metric, cost efficiency. This is a metric that's frequently batted about. It's one that's difficult to illustrate accurately. It's very easy to find yourself comparing apples and oranges because of so many different scope elements to a project. So we did take it upon ourselves, or actually worked with OCMI again, to develop a very detailed apples to apples comparison across all of our 3 previous middle schools. That also is included in the packet associated with this item for your review. But looking very closely at that and the building elements specifically associated with that, you can see the bottom line rolled up numbers here on this slide. And also important to note that these are actual costs associated with these schools as bid and awarded versus a budgeted cost, which, as I mentioned, we fully intend to improve upon. Really proud of this team. We've established this as a goal early on to try to move the bar higher with respect to value for our students, long-term and on day one, and for our taxpayers. And we feel like these are some metrics which demonstrate success in that regard and that continuous improvement. So really wrapping it up here, in summary, this is the same information that I've touched on throughout the presentation. You can see the same row that you approved in August associated with this mass grading GMP1 at 3.25 for total construction budget. You also see the total project construction budget tallied at the bottom for information. But really it's this top row that is the breakdown of the recommendation here this evening. 73.6 million for construction, 5.9 million for FF&E, and 3.2 million for construction professional services, for a total of 82.7. That's what you'll see on the action item for 2.07. And finally, to wrap it up, we have some major planned milestones outlined here. We've begun work on site for the mass grading, as I mentioned, this week, and expect to welcome students into the new school in about 20 months from today. So with that, we've got a lot of work to do, but first I want to open it up to questions and discussion on this informational item here. Thank you.
Any questions from the committee on this item for the middle school? I do have one myself. Adam, are you planning any new middle schools in the future? And would the school district now convert this to be the kind of the prototype design? Is there any discussion around that?
So I can say that there are no new middle schools programmed in the 5-year CIP, nor are there any new middle schools listed in our 20-year facilities master plan. That said, we early on played with some site fit concepts where a similar, could we redevelop an existing middle school in an on-site redevelopment fashion similar to O'Brien? Just physically, would the campuses facilitate that? And this particular prototype lends itself well to that on a couple of campuses, but that's not currently contemplated. It was really just a exploration exercise to see what this prototype footprint could do for us in the future if demand warranted. I think that's an important part of this conversation we started from early on. Enrollment demand, facility deficiency demands. This is a tool in the toolbox. Right now, we don't have plans to use it elsewhere at this time.
All right, thanks. Any other questions, Mr. Ivory?
Sorry, trying to unmute myself here. So I think when you presented the original 4 million that we've already approved, I don't want to go back and beat a dead horse here, but I don't remember that us having quite the breakdown. But now that we've got that breakdown, if I'm doing my math correct, based upon the spreadsheet you sent us at the last meeting that was canceled, that now puts our construction manager budget to date with this one right around $7 million that we spent to date on that. And I just I once again just want to reiterate the fact that I could at least listen to an argument that construction manager is necessary on a hard bid project, but on these construction manager risk projects, I think it is a complete, I'm not saying a complete, let me rephrase that. I think it's a big waste of money. It's not a complete waste because I understand that there is some value to it, but at the end of the day, there's no assurances by any of it. I know we've talked about this in the past about it being a kind of like an insurance policy, but the difference is at the end of a job, if you've got insurance on it and it goes bad, the insurance policy pays you and makes you whole again. The construction manager on this doesn't. There's nothing there. All they can do is help you win a court battle, which to my understanding, we've never been in yet. So once again, at the end of the day, I still look at it as a redundant feature that basically is costing us on O'Brien $1.7 million to basically have a recorder on site. So I just want that to be noted. Once again, I'm just, and in the future, I don't know how to get past it. So in the future, I'm probably just going to have to vote against the services. I don't know if you want to pull them out separately. I'm not sure how you want to do it, but it's getting harder and harder for me to just sit here and watch these numbers go out the door when I know at the end of the day, we're going to hit a point where we're going to be like, hey, guess what? We could have built another middle or another elementary school for our kids in this. And instead we gave all this money to a construction management company that really didn't do anything. So once again, I'll jump down off my.
All right, thanks. Are there any other questions on this item? Not seeing any. I'll go ahead and take us to item 2.07, which is presentation and discussion, possible action to recommend the Washoe County School Board of Trustees approve the allocation of $82,700,000 to the 2020-2021 B Major Projects Program. So, Mr. Searcy, take it away.
Thank you, Chairman Solero. This is the updated graphic. Always important to us to highlight that this list of projects includes specifically the same named projects that were on the 2016 WC1 ballot initiative, with only a couple of asterisk exceptions. I wanted to also highlight a couple of minor sort of formatting adjustments. Like I said, it's very important to us to keep this consistent with what was approved and demonstrate how we are following through on that mandate. We continuously update the total budget allocation column with each and every committee meeting, and the red check marks illustrating the potentially fully funded projects. I added a red check mark in advance of this evening and showing the grand total potentially with the action on this item, with the previously approved design phase funding and the previously approved early construction phase funding. But on the total committed column, this is again an actual amount of committed dollars associated with each of these projects and line items as of November 3rd, 2020. Previously, we had added these check marks really as the project was completely closed out. As many of you are aware, sometimes that can linger. There's outstanding purchase orders for one reason or another, but really just change that title to refer to it as substantially complete. So those of you who are familiar with these projects, Nick Polakidis, Desert Sky, Sky Ranch, Nutrition Services, this grounds buildings replacement, these projects may or may not have a lingering purchase order or two outstanding, but really those projects absolutely are substantially complete. We've got Marcy Hers and John Bohatch, which opened this school year, but do still have some minor FF&E or construction change order expenses trickling through those projects as they move through their first year of activity. So again, really just a formatting change that I wanted to highlight. You can see the numbers on the screen, and really the action associated with this is exclusively the funding of the remaining construction phase for O'Brien Middle School replacement at $82.7 million. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Searcy. Are there any questions on this item from the committee? Are there any public comments, Ms. Scott?
No public comment.
Thank you. With it,
Recommendations, Councilmember Reese.
I've got a motion. Anybody want to take a second?
Second, Anderson.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Looks like that passes unanimously. That'll take us on to item number 3, 3.01, public comment. Due to the current state of emergency declared by the governor, members of the public wishing to make public comment about an item on the agenda must submit their comments via email to capitalfundingcommittee@washoeschools.net. Any public comment received will be forwarded to the Capital Funding Protection Committee for its consideration, consistent with the emergency provisions provided above. I had not seen anything in my inbox, but I'm going to ask Ms. Scott if there is any general public comment.
No public comment.
Thank you very much. With that, we'll move on to item 3.02. Our next meeting will be Thursday, February 4th, 2021 at 4 p.m. Location to be determined. And then based on that, 3.03, we'll go ahead and adjourn this meeting.